Hey guys, today we're going to talk about properties of parallelograms. And first off, we're going to decide what the definition of a parallelogram is. Okay, so you'll notice up top it says a quadrilateral with two pairs of parallel sides is a parallelogram. And when we want to write a name of a parallelogram, you use the sign Y. I don't really know why they use that, but they do. Okay, so to know if something is a parallelogram, there's a few properties that you need to know, and I should have included these, but I didn't. So if you want to find some blank space on the side of your paper, you need to write these. Okay, so the first one is if a quadrilateral is a parallelogram, then its opposite angles are congruent. So here's your parallelogram, okay, just an object with two sets of parallel sides. Okay, and if it's a quadrilateral, it's a parallelogram, then its opposite angles are congruent. Okay, so this would be congruent to this, and these would be congruent to its opposite. So you need to write down opposite angles are congruent. Okay, so opposite angles are congruent. Okay, second thing you need to know, okay, is that if you have a quadrilateral, its consecutive angles are going to be supplementary. Okay, so if you add up your two consecutive angles, it will be supplementary. So you need to write down consecutive angles are supplementary. And remember, supplementary means add up to 180 degrees. Okay, so it doesn't matter if it was these two that we already drew, those would add up to 180. These guys would add up to 180. It doesn't matter which one, okay? Any consecutive set of angles in a parallelogram are going to add up to 180 degrees. Okay, next one. Okay, the next one, if you have a parallelogram, and you draw diagonals down the middle, then its diagonals will bisect each other. So write down diagonals bisect. Okay, so diagonals bisect each other. Okay. The last one you need to know is that if you have a parallelogram, that's an awful parallelogram. Let's try again. Okay, so if you have a parallelogram, then the opposite sides are going to be congruent. So this side would be congruent to that side, and this side would be congruent to this side. So opposite sides are congruent. Okay, so these are the four properties that you need to know about parallelograms. Make sure that you have each of them written down. Okay, so let's look at our example number 1 here. It says that in parallelogram CDEF, we have DE equals 74. So let's write that down, 74. We have DG equaling 31. 31 in here, and we have measure angle FCD equaling 72 degrees. Okay, so this whole angle is 72 degrees. And our goal is to figure out what CF is. Well, with the properties that we just learned, we know that opposite sides of a parallelogram are congruent. So 74, the DE would be congruent to CF, so we know that CF would be 74. Okay, then our next one is ECF. Okay, so we have this angle, we're wanting to find it, it cuts it right down the middle. Well, remember one of our properties was that if you draw a diagonal through a parallelogram, it bisects it. Well, what that means is that both of these angles, okay, would end up being congruent to each other. So since we're just wanting to find this piece, we need an angle that is half of 72. And what's half of 72? Well, of course, that is 36 degrees. And our last one, we want to find the length of DF. Well, since we have DG equaling 31, we know that is half the length of DG is half the length to DF. So since DG is 31, we need to multiply that by 2. And 31 times 2 would give us a length of 62. Okay, so those are just a few of our properties in play right there with a couple of examples. Okay, let's try another one real quick with a basketball goal. Okay, this time it says that parallelogram KLMN, LM is 28. Okay, so let's label that. Top one is 28. LN, so the diagonal, is 26. And LKN is 74 degrees. So LKN is 74 degrees. And our first goal is to find KN. What is that length? Well, once again, you have congruent sides when they're across from each other. So KN would be 28. Okay, what about angle NML? NML is this angle right up here. And we know that opposite angles are congruent. So since LKN is 74, NML is going to be 74 as well. And of course, the last one, we got LO. So since the diagonal was 26, you know, the whole length of the diagonal is 26, so LO is half of that. So 26 divided by 2 would give LO a length of 13. Okay, so there is our you try number 1. Few more examples for you. Okay, so let's move on and try a few more. All right, so now we're going to try to start getting into our algebra a little bit. So it says WXYZ is a parallelogram, and we want to find the length YZ. Okay, so here's YZ, and we're wanting to find the length of it, and we know that it is 8A minus 4. Well, what is another length that's equal to 8A minus 4? Well, we know that these two side lengths are congruent, so we can set those two side lengths equal to each other. Okay, so let's go ahead and solve this equation with variables on both sides by subtracting 6A on both sides. And that gives us 2A minus 4, and that all equals 10. And then add 4 on both sides, and that gives us 2A equals 14. And lastly, if you divide by 2 on both sides, that gives you A equals 7. So we found what our variable is, but now we need to go ahead and plug it in. So we were wanting to find YZ, so we have 8A minus 4, so let's plug in 7. So 8 times 7 minus 4 is 56, and minus 2 is 52. Okay, lastly, we want to go ahead and figure out what angle Z is. Okay, so let's look at it. And I'll set up the equation for you, and I'm going to ask you to do the rest. Okay, so what do we know about angle Z? It's YB plus 2. And what do we know about this angle and this angle? Well, they're not congruent. Remember, they're supplementary. So if we take our angle Z, which is 9B plus 2, we can add to that 18B minus 11, and that is supplementary. And those two angles are supplementary, so we can set the whole thing equal to 180 degrees. And then you would need to go ahead and combine like terms and solve that and get your variable B. Okay, let's try another one here. It says EFGH is a parallelogram, and we want to find JG. Well, what's something that's equal to JG? JG is W plus 8. What's another side length that's equal? Well, we know that EJ would be congruent to it, so we can say W plus 8 equals 3w. So let's solve that by subtracting w out on both sides. So we know that 8 equals 2w, and if you divide that by 2, w equals 4. And of course you could go plug that back in for JG, and 4 plus 8 would equal 12. So JG would end up being 12. Okay, so FH, what do we know about it? Well, we know that diagonals on a parallelogram are congruent. So since we know JG, this is 12, we know that whole length is going to be 24. Well, we know that diagonals are going to be congruent on our, we know that our diagonals are going to bisect. Okay, so that's something important to remember. But we know that that whole length, E or GE, is going to be 24. Well, what if we wanted to find FH? Okay, we know that these two are congruent. Okay, so we could set up 4z minus 9 equals 2z. Okay, and then you can go ahead and solve that, and I trust that you could do that and plug that back in. So you just need to be able to go ahead and set up some equations. All right, this should be enough to get you started on your homework. Go ahead and get started on that. See ya.